using food when I'm nervous, using food when I'm stressed, using food when I've had relationship issues, using food when I have felt inadequate, using food when I have felt abandoned, using food when I have felt like my expectations of myself haven't been met or I haven't met someone else's expectations.
Welcome to Relationship Headquarters, and today I am joined by Kim Hines, who is a world-renowned nutritionist. Kim, I am thrilled to have you here with us. Well, I like this because when I was looking around for guests, I noticed that you have a podcast that's called,
The Emotional Eats podcast.
and I thought that's perfect because she speaks the same language that I do. And then as I started getting into it more, I noticed that you really emphasize the connection between eating and emotions. If you can just tell our audience how you got into that, and we're going to go into how that affects relationships and even dating. But let's find out a little bit about you first.
Thank you. Yes, this didn't happen just because I'm good at it and I want to help people get better at not eating emotionally and not digging
Not
into the food.
altruistic.
Exactly. This did not happen because I have a PhD in emotional eating. The reason why it really started to happen was, and I never made the connection earlier, is I have a history of using food to cope, using food when I'm nervous, using food when I'm stressed, using food when I've had relationship issues, using food when I have felt inadequate, using food when I have felt abandoned, using food when I have felt like my expectations of myself haven't been met or I haven't met someone else's expectations. And throughout the years, when I look at what I'm leaning into, whether it is first thing when I was 8 or 10 years old, and I'm leaning into the sugar because I'm left alone with my little brother and I'm in charge, and that's kind of scary. Or in college, feeling a little bit, I was on the outskirts. I didn't always feel like I was making really close friends in college. And then beyond that, even as I got older, every time something happened in a relationship, we had a fight or something, and I thought it was going to be over, leaning into the sugar and then feeling bad because, of course, when we're in relationships, we feel like, oh my gosh, now my body's going to look terrible because I've been eating and I'm going to gain weight from it. So that's how I got into that, but I really got into nutrition at first because I went the wrong direction on it. I tried to figure out how can I control every bit of everything. I was running marathons. I was, again, controlling everything in my life that I possibly could. And I was starting to study the nutrition, but as I got into the realistic part of it, it's very, very difficult to stay on a diet. It's difficult to follow a meal plan. And we have a lot of reasons for that we can talk to. But that's how I came to it. I really needed it because I realized that that was my drug of choice when it came to calming myself down.
So, no lifelong dream to be an emotional eating podcast, a health guru from 5 years old.
Oh,
Nothing
no.
more
I
trial and
actually thought I
error.
was going to be a therapist, by the way.
Well, you got some of that in you.
There you go.
But even with therapists though, we come from it from a broken, pain filled. Most all of us have some of that stuff, and we wanted to
Mm-hmm.
find out how to heal things. And as I was talking to you, I know that there was a phrase I'd heard. I think it's in Eastern Europe, and they say "healthy body, healthy mind," and that's backwards from the way I've always thought about it, which is to change your thoughts, change your future, change everything is thoughts oriented. But it just caught me reflecting on, gosh, what I eat and how I take care of myself. It really does affect thoughts, it affects attitude, it affects confidence. And I started realizing how much I can't separate those two. And I think that's what I picked up with you is that it's not an either or type of thing, but it's another way of taking care of yourself as opposed to, like you said, just being strong or being confident. That I think food sometimes is what enables someone to get away with that as far as looking a certain way, but they're cheating with food.
Yes. And it's interesting you said get away with it because I was able to get away with my emotional eating for years because when you're running 20 to 30 miles a week and you're training for all these long distance runs, and this was before even menopause, for the women that are going through all the hormonal changes, once you go through the hormonal changes, it doesn't matter all the things you do. You have to lay low a little bit. And I was
Mm.
overdoing it in every part. And I love what you said about healthy body, healthy mind. We cannot separate the mind and the body, but the body is where we often will see the circumstances and the consequences of the things that we are doing to ourselves. And it's a trickle down effect. We have weight gain. Is the weight gain, most people say weight gain is because I don't exercise and I eat too much. Well, that's great, but why are you eating too much? Why are you not feeling motivated? Why do you not want to exercise? When we're overweight, it is definitely an indicator that we're using food in a different way than we probably could. And I'm not saying restrict, I'm not saying diet, I'm
Hmm.
not saying only fruits and vegetables and protein, but we are using food, fat, sugar, and salt to numb ourselves and to veg out. So then we go one layer deeper than that. That's the mind. What's going on in our mind that makes us feel so negative and so sad and so that we have to block it out with these wonderful things because as we know, dopamine it's something that is so easy for us in some ways to raise that dopamine. Those just dopamine receptors are ready to go, but there are also people who can't get enough and they have to keep increasing what they're doing to make that dopamine come in even more. And what does that do for us? It gives us the happy hit for a little while. Just so, hey, and guess what? We all have something. Some people are
Hmm.
shopping. Some people are playing video games. Some people are scrolling on their phone. Some people, unfortunately, are drinking too much or they're taking drugs. But
Oh, there's a
and
lot
we have
more
a
of it.
spectrum. There's a full spectrum on that.
And when I'm thinking of those people doing that, I'm thinking in terms of if I can just get the relationship I want, if I can just have things work out. I was thinking about there's one client in particular, and we weren't working on weight or anything. That's not really my area of expertise. But I realized how much the body carries grief or carries stuff and weight. And as she resolved, there's some stuff she had went through from childhood. And as she worked through that, she came in one day and held her pants. They were still on, but she pulled her belt loop out. She was real country. She's like, Bob, look. And she had 2 inches and I was like, I didn't know what happened. She goes, look at this weight I've lost. That was the first time a lot of the theory stuff that I'd read really resonated, and that I started to become more aware of, gosh, that's true. When someone eats poorly, that's a huge indicator of what's going on. And conversely, and I'm wondering if you've seen this, if someone just starts eating healthy, and I love what you said, it's not restrictions, it's not just yucky stuff, it starts eating and taking care of himself, how much that will also affect confidence. It will affect how they see themselves. We work with this all the time.
Yes. And what's really interesting is our gut microbiome is so smart and it has this connection with the brain. And there is always a transmission between our gut and our brain. And when we talk about eating food, the bacteria in our gut, they can really respond to that food and it can agitate the brain. It can make it feel unwell. It can make you feel
Hmm.
lethargic. So there really is like physical. We know there's an absolutely physical connection between food. I just read an article actually, and I believe this one was in Psychology Today about how they're asking, is anxiety a metabolic disorder? And if that's the case, that would make a lot of sense on the food that we're putting in our bodies, which affects blood sugar, which affects all these other things. So I truly do believe there's a huge connection with that. And when you look at children, when you give them too much sugar and you see that movement and that energy, for adults, sometimes that becomes the high, little bit of agitation, irritation, energy, and then we all have that crash from it also. But you were talking about this connection with relationships too. It's always like that. We get into relationships and we feel so good. We're in a relationship, everything's clicking. He's into me, he's calling me, he's texting me. And of course, we're happy. And not only are we happy where we eat and our food, we're relaxed, our cortisol's not jumping around. And that's a whole nother issue because that's inflammation. But we also love our bodies at that moment because we get that validation from our relationship. So there's this whole full body mind connection. And then when things aren't going well, all of a sudden we question it all. And then we're emotionally eating, and we tank the body image, we that tanks on us. All of the things are connected. And I love how you made that connection, because we want to separate everything out, but I don't think we can.
No, I don't think we can either. And with the women you talk with, I'm thinking about those that they want to be healthy, get healthy, and whatever that means to them. What's the struggle you find that they have that I know when I start talking, no one says, I want to be unhealthy. No one wakes up and says that, I realize. So I know they try hard. I don't know that it's lack of trying. How would you describe the block or the thing that gives them the biggest headache as far as trying to overcome, not just eating, but life in general, but that really manifests in eating?
Oh, I think that is a wonderful question. And this is why. Because it's almost like women are trying too hard. And I know that sounds a little crazy, but women are trying too hard because they are relying on willpower and discipline
Mhm.
to white knuckle their way through not eating the cookies in their cupboard. They're literally trying to steadfastly not open up the chips, not go through the drive through. And diet culture has taught women, you know what, if you want to be thin and you want to be successful and you want to be somebody, then you're going to do this diet, and you're going to do this 30-day diet. You're going to do it perfectly. You're going to lose 30 pounds like your friend over here. Everything's going to work out great. And the problem is, everyone is very individual. Everybody's hormone panel is different. Every woman is going through something different in their life. Every woman has had different traumas that they may have to resolve. Every woman has a different way of handling their situations, their challenging situations. And that's why a lot of times I am really excited when I hear about the women you work with, because they're working with you to figure out how to get through these situations. They don't communicate their needs, or whatever the situations are. There's so many layers to this. So that's number one challenge. Everybody's jumping into diet culture thinking, I can do all these different diets and it's all going to work out. Well, 25 years later, we're all realizing that's not what's happening.
Mm.
That's not working. So I'll say to someone, let's just change this. Let's change the way you're looking at food and the way you eat. Let's not take out food. Let's talk about what you are going to eat consciously 4 times a day. This is what you'll eat. Whatever else happens, we're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to make sure that you are nourished. You have comfort food. You have, and I don't mean comfort food like going out and having a bunch of mac and cheese. Sometimes that's
Mhm.
appropriate. But what I mean by that is, when you sit down to a meal, if you like hot food, you're having a hot food meal. You're having, maybe one of the recommendations of all the people coming on, from doctors, hormone specialists, fitness specialists, are saying a lot of protein, a lot of fiber. If you want to add those carbs in too, we can add that in, but eat what's really good for you and comforting and warm and satiating first. And then you can have those other things. And what women are actually thinking in their head all the time is, I can't have cookies. I can't have ice cream. I got to get the
Mhm.
chocolate out of the house. I've got to quit drinking soda. Instead of saying, oh, I can have these beautiful meals. And then if I want a cookie afterwards, it's okay.
Mhm.
But the block is trying to change the societal view. And the other societal issue is, you can lose 10 pounds in 2 weeks. We have marketing that is working against us. Real, true weight loss comes from doing the inner work inside, in your mind and your body, and it takes time, or it's going to come right back.
I love that connection between the inner, the head and heart, and also think in terms of one in our campfire program. Those that have gone through that know first things we tell women exercise is, I got this from Al-Anon, the hungry, angry, tired, lonely. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's right.
halt. I love
That's right.
that.
Halt. That's right. Halt. And for them to realize that hunger is just an emotion. So if you're hungry, just probably time to eat something. Just, but to get it that simple, because you're at so many I've heard of them that were like, well, it's not time to eat, or it's not, you shouldn't feel tired, or I shouldn't feel alone, shouldn't over here. And I said, you would never do that with a little girl. You would never tell her, if it's 3 in the morning, not exceptions, like that kind of stuff, I'm hungry, we just ate. But just in general, you would never think of shaming her for how she felt. And I hear you normalizing, whether they're hungry or not, to do something with it, and that it's not so much the big bad cookie as much as it's just what's the core need behind it. I'm hungry. And then it's not as this big super forbidden thing. I think of one of the ways to make something appealing is telling someone they can't have it.
Oh, every one of us has a naughty 5-year-old inside our heads. And if someone ever tells me I can't have another Reese's peanut butter cup ever, what is the one thing I'm going to think about? And I do. Days that I even say it to myself, I have to say, wait a minute, you can literally drive to the store after work and have it if you want. But here's the rule: you have to sit quiet, no phone, nobody talking to you, and you're going to eat it slowly and love every bite of it.
Oh, I like that. And so I hear with you connecting with food and emotions, what's the biggest struggle the women you work with have when they're doing this? That may be broad, I realize.
No, I have, there's so many, but the bigger ones outside of falling into this diet mentality is really not taking care of themselves every day. So I would love to say it's about the food, just to make it really easy on everyone, because that's what everybody online is telling you. It's about the food. You eat this, you eat cottage cheese, you eat protein, you eat this shake, you drink this little pretty pink drink. Everything's gonna be fine. You're good. But it's not about that at all. It's really not even about the food. What women forget to do is they really forget to take care of themselves. So many women have been raising kids, they've been in jobs, they are possibly taking care of their parents now. They're still putting everybody else's needs first. And when I say self care, I'm not talking bubble baths and
Mm-hmm.
massages, which, by the way, if you can fit that in, have at it. That's great.
Which they are rather obvious. I mean,
Yes.
awesome.
Yes. And I really think women struggle to take care of themselves. And there are other things that we can do. By the way, exercise and lifting weights, that doesn't have to be self care. That can be something you choose to do for your body. But I do think walking can be self care, getting outside in nature. I think people struggle with, they've let go of all their hobbies that they used to do that are really fun because they now are putting all their energy into other people, or they feel guilty. Guilt is a big thing. Guilt and shame are so big in women that I work with, and dropping the guilt and shame around actually doing something for yourself outside of the hobbies, just even listening to music again, or dancing, or going to have a cup of coffee by yourself is really powerful, and just sitting. And we have all these different things that we can do, but self-care seems to have slipped away because when we don't take care of ourselves, we are at maximum level. And one person could say one more thing to us and we're going to be gone
Mm-hmm.
because we haven't brought down the level of the bucket of all the things that fill up throughout the day for stressors. So I think that's my biggest struggle, is having women actually proactively do things for themselves throughout the day. Because again, all they want to do is diet, because that seems like the
Mm-hmm.
quick, easy fix instead of actually doing these things that are lovely for them, but they actually think that that's harder.
And when they do diet and they fall back on that, what is the body's reaction to dieting?
Yes, unfortunately, we'll see people online and they don't do it as much because I think we have a lot more education. And so, Instagram, TikTok, all these social media outlets, there's good and bad to that. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of good information out there. But for a long, long time, we were taught that 12 or 1300 calories was okay. And when I listen to the experts that have come on to my show and I really dig into this, what we're finding out is young children, that's what they're running on, is 12 or 1300
Mm.
calories. So when we don't have enough food in our bodies, we have a very complex makeup of hormones. We've got 50 different hormones in both of our bodies, men and women. But when we are tipping the scales on these hormones by not eating enough, we're getting into thyroid issues. Thyroid can cause people to overeat. Thyroid, it can also, hypothyroidism can cause you to gain weight. When we aren't eating enough food, we also are agitated and hangry. And that does not help relationships, as we
Sorry,
know.
did you say hangry?
Yes. Hungry and angry all at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. And we don't know why. And it's like being dehydrated or hungry. We don't pinpoint it back till later. We have to be really proactive about how we treat our bodies. And I think that's the big thing, is being proactive. But dieting also, it shames us. If you are not feeling like you are living up to this diet and you are eating too much, When women are tracking their food and they look at that at the end of the day, their confidence tanks and they feel like they're doing something wrong. That can lead to a binge right there. That can actually go the opposite direction, or it makes them double down and do more destructive things to their body. And it never ends well. It never ends well.
When you're talking about all the different hormones, I have this picture of the body holding on to the food it has inside, saying, "Oh, you're not going to give me enough." I'm thinking of a little kid. I'm just hold on to this. There was a picture I saw of, I can't get this out of my head, this boy that had starved to death in Africa, and he had a piece of food in his hand. And they asked why, and they said, well, because he knew that if he ate that, there would be no more food. So he held on to that to always know he had a piece of food, but he ended up dying from starvation. I'm not saying it's to that extent of folks, but the logic of the mind and the body to me is fascinating. Of just, I think sometimes with at least dieting, the way folks talk about, the body hears that as starving. And if we're
Oh,
just going to
yes.
starve you, we're
And
just
it's going
going
to hang
to.
on. It will hang on to every last bit that it can. And that's a beautiful point. And I think that's a really good analogy, actually, with the little boy holding on to the food, because our body is so smart. It knows what's going on, the level of not wanting to let go of your fuel, not wanting to let go. Plus, women, our bodies, it depends on what stage you are in your before perimenopause, menopause. But our bodies were meant to have children. So if you haven't gotten to postmenopause yet, your body is saying, hey, if you think you want to have a child, I can't let you get that thin. And women
Mm-hmm.
actually have dieted to the point of not having their periods.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very scary thing. That's the opposite side of what we're dealing with, because most people end up in the overweight side because they can't do the dieting. I love that analogy, though. I think that's very true. The other thing that we didn't really touch upon is not just weight. Weight is also inflammation on your body, bloating, inflammation, and that inflammation can come from cortisol, stress, like you said, traumas. There's a lot of things that if we're not healing mind and body, then our body can't let go. And I have a man, I mostly work with women, but I have a man that when he first started losing weight, it was not actually weight, because we did body scans on him too. We also had him go check his muscle and fat loss. It was purely inflammation. And you could just see how
Wow.
the bags under his eyes went away, the puffiness in his hands went away, his back started feeling better. And then we had a long progression of weight loss. I see it in women too. They say, oh my gosh, my face isn't so puffy, my neck's not so puffy.
Mm.
So inflammation is caused by a lot of the mind things also, not just the food. And then food is like that's just the match on the lighter fluid at that point
Mm.
is making it worse.
I didn't know that about inflammation. I mean, I've heard, excuse me, that inflammation is bad and we don't want a lot of that, but I never realized that it could have such an effect that you could actually notice a difference when that inflammation went down.
Yes. And I even noticed it going through the whole menopausal hormonal change. My face, I didn't have cheekbones for a while. I had big cheeks, and I
Oh,
was like,
wow.
what is going on?
Mm-hmm.
But I even went through my own. I want women to know I do this all day, every day. But menopause was challenging. And when I didn't feel good about my body, and I didn't feel good about trying to figure out which pair of pants I was going to wear, I didn't feel good in general, just physically in my body, and I didn't understand what was going on at first. I did emotionally eat because that was my response to feeling better, because nothing else seemed to be feeling good at that time. And you don't even realize it. It's like a couple cookies
Mm-hmm.
here, things you wouldn't buy at the grocery store, you're picking up another one. Some people were drinking more wine. I had to stop that a few years ago because I found the same thing, thinking about
Mm-hmm.
the wine at night. So we all have those vices, but I love your connections with that.
I'm laughing when you said a couple of cookies. The couples in my past is a warm up.
Yes, I get
Um,
that. I'm not a two cookie girl. I was a sleeve girl. It's Girl Scout time, by the
yes.
way. And
Yeah.
those
Oh,
Girl
it
Scout,
is. It is. Walked
these
right
sweet
by.
girls,
I love
yep.
them, but I walked right by thinking, I can get some later, but if I get them now, I'll be back 4 or 5 times
Yeah.
and they'll just be gone. So later I'll get them when it's toward the end of the season. But I
Oh,
did
that's
notice that as
so
well.
funny. I used to get a box of those and I would stick them in my backpack so nobody knew when I was younger. And then I could just eat the whole sleeve of Thin Mints. And I heard the lady at the grocery store as I was walking, because I did the same thing. You took the long way around to the other door. And I heard her say, "Hey, it's so easy now. You could just Venmo or PayPal us." And I thought, oh no,
That's the
this is
point.
not good.
As you're saying that about food, I have seen women, again, wasn't my focus with them, that have dieted and they couldn't lose a pound. They've exercised like a dog. And John Bradshaw was one years ago to talk about this, this connection. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's right. It's just their body's just holding on to that weight. And usually there's pain associated with it or trauma or something that why, and it wasn't for lack of effort, but I just was fascinated at the stuff, and I believed in the stuff they were going through. And I think that appealed to me when you talked about the emotional part of it, because to many, maybe because they're already with you, but are there those that just have a hard time seeing the connection between the two as far as not just weight, but how it affects our body and our emotions and how intertwined that is?
Well, it's interesting. By the time someone comes to see me, when they come into a consultation, they do think that they're coming to see a traditional nutritionist. I am technically called a nutritional health coach, but when they go through the 30 to 45-minute consultation with me, by the time we're done, they fully understand that if they want someone who's going to give them a meal plan, count their calories and macros, and weigh them in every week, I have a really close friend who's a registered dietitian who will be happy to do that with them. But if they want to dig deeper and they want to really look at the emotions. They want to look at their relationships. They want to look at their childhood. They want to look at their patterns of boundaries,
Hmm.
people pleasing. When they get done with the consultation, they understand where we're going. And sometimes there's tears in my consultation because
Hmm.
it starts to hit home what's really going on. And sometimes I had someone in a consultation just a little while ago say, "Oh my gosh, are you in my home?" Because this is not something to feel ashamed of. You're not alone. There's so many. It's why I created a community for it. But by the time they finish that, they know that that's where we're going to go. And some people say, "Yes, I'm in," and then we're all in. We go through it. There will be a couple women sometimes who are still struggling to go to that deeper level. And I understand. And this is why. This is why I own a practice with two therapists, too, is because I have the resources to send somebody to go deeper if they're not feeling like they can get there, get down
Hmm.
to healing the trauma, getting a little bit deeper. And I'm not a therapist, and I totally don't mind admitting that. And so I can only go so far in my questions, but so much usually comes out. And then I also, many women that come to me have already been seeing the therapist. And so we have consent to talk about that. So
Hmm.
it's really I just find it so enjoyable when someone says, "I'm an open book. Let's go."
I'm sure that doesn't happen often like that. And I hear how vulnerable it is also to be able to take a look at this, especially if someone's crying, and the button or the nerve that you might have hit to sort of help explore where that's going. So when someone has this relationship with food, I think we all do to some degree, how do you connect that with them, either with the particular emotions that are tied to that? In other words, the trigger that happens is that we want to look after this food, as in when you're eating this at a certain time, what's going on? Is it when you're feeling certain things, be aware of these foods? I'm making this up. But how do you help them to sort of prepare? Because once they leave your office, it's them, it's food, it's the world.
Yes. The very first step that all of my clients go through is just an awareness process. We don't even try to change the behavior. And so, for example, I'll give you an example even on me. I used to come home and drop my bag, and it was the exact same pattern every day. I'd get out of the car, drop my bag right inside the door, and then I would go straight to the pantry. And it's interesting because chocolate and peanut butter, that's usually my soothing. That would be later in the evening. I already know that about myself, but I would go for the blue corn chips that would be in there. And what's really interesting to me is when I don't have a good work transition and the stress follows me into the house, I want something crunchy that's going to change my state. I want something in a bag, in a box that's going to help me right now. Some people will pour a glass of wine. Some people will go to
Mm-hmm.
the cookies. Some people will go to the chips. So we just explore what's your pattern. So most of my people, when I poll all of my clients, most of them find that eating after dinner is actually one of their stickiest times. The second stickiest time is between 3 and 6 o'clock. That's another, because that's our afternoon slump. Our cortisol's dropping. We're tired. Like you said, we're a little vulnerable. We're vulnerable in different parts of the day. And when our cortisol is not really high, we're not on our game quite as much. So we look at your pattern individually because everybody has their own pattern. And when someone's sitting home at night, especially if they're, for example, alone and they get up from Netflix and they go to get the food, they're filling a void. They could be filling a hole. I have someone that I work with and she gets on the computer. Every time she gets on the computer, she has to have a bowl of nuts or she has to have a bowl of
Mm-hmm.
something that she can mindlessly eat. And that is procrastination, rewarding for doing the work. I don't want to do this hard work. I don't want to get started. So we just come up with all these ways to look at your pattern. And once we map it out, we start from the beginning and find out, hey, what could we have done differently? If you are lonely, what if you set up an alarm after dinner to call a friend? If you are feeling like you're going to procrastinate, set an alarm on your phone, have a nice snack that's healthy and feels really good for you. And yeah, you can have the snack later, but set an alarm that you're going to work for 30 minutes and I use something called Brain FM, which is an app. It is kind of like binaural beats. There's music that plays to different levels of focus that you want. And I actually put that in my ears and put a timer on because I am that person. I'm every woman, by the way. I would absolutely go dig in and eat something I don't even like that's got some kind of crunch or something to it to avoid having to write an email, write a blog, process a podcast. So that's what we do. We go back in the pattern.
I'm bringing back memories when you're saying that of the times of having something nearby to snack on. And I think what I also hear is in the process of doing this, of you getting to know yourself, that it sounds like it spills over into other areas too. While we focus on what you eat and the food of it is to, you'd said last we talked a couple weeks ago about how you noticed something about your relationships. And you didn't necessarily say this bag of chips represents this, but what I recall is we were talking about how women talk to men. And you were like, yes, I used to do that. But I'm thinking, wondering, with the insights you have about self-care and what you eat and how you take care of yourself, I wonder if you see when someone does that, those same insights just kind of spill over into other areas of their life.
Oh, absolutely. So it's interesting you said that because I just had a client that was telling me that she responds very negatively inside. It's just jars her when someone talks too directly to her. And it was somebody at work that made her feel, whether he was truly feeling this way or not, doesn't matter. It's how she responded. And it was giving direction in a very harsh way, very short, direct, harsh way. And when we really took a look at that, anytime a man was like that with her, including in a relationship, she just crumbled inside. And at home that night, she would eat. And it comes from the fact that her father was very, very hard
Mhm.
on her, very high expectations. And she was never feeling good enough when she heard that tone of voice. So that's one example. And another I always think of, and I think this is one of the ones you talked about before, and we've had so many great conversations on this, is when you are people pleasing a lot, you are not people pleasing just with one person. But let's say you're trying to be the absolute best girlfriend ever, and your boyfriend shows up late and you just let it go because you so want this relationship. He does things and he doesn't call you, doesn't text you, not voicing your needs. you tend to maybe eat and soothe yourself because you're feeling inadequate. You're feeling like you're not good enough or you're not worthy. You may not be able to put those words to that, by the way. You just feel it from things that you've had from your past. Something that we didn't talk about that I thought was really interesting that came up in a conversation with one of my clients is anxious attachment styles. I see that anxious attachment or abandonment feeling that women may have, that seems to be very connected to emotional eating also. So
Mm.
yes, the relationship piece, when you connect why you're eating, it helps you in all different ways because then you can look at those parts of you where you don't feel confident and strong and that you are worthy or deserving, and you can work on that instead of focusing just on the food.
I like it. I noticed that about attachment, anxious attachment. I've heard about it a lot. I remember studying it as far as how that affected their relationship with food in general.
And again, I'm not a mental health counselor. This is just something that's come
Yeah,
up
yeah.
in our
No, it
conversation.
sounds
Yeah.
like it's just this is what I've observed. This is what
Yes.
I've seen. This
Yes.
is I think most folks on podcast are not a mental health counselor, but they say stuff all the time anyway.
Yes.
So I've enjoyed this because the mental health stuff, love that. Been doing that for years. But the food stuff, I love the specialty with that it doesn't have to be as simple as don't eat this, do eat that. And I'm hearing you talk about being able to make food work for you or make it a benefit, something that actually helps you as opposed to something you have to fight all the time. And I'm thinking of a couple of people in our groups now that have talked about this challenge with food. For those that are listening, we'll have your links down here at the bottom below this if you're watching on the podcast or YouTube. But for those listening, how can someone reach out to you or how can they find out about you if they want to follow up, if this has really hit a nerve with them?
Oh, thank you for asking. I am on Instagram mostly, and I'm at
Yes, you
Kim Hines
are.
Health. Yes, I'm on Instagram. I love Instagram. I love sharing, and I love talking and having conversations with people. So please feel free to DM me at Kim Hines Health. I also have the Emotional Eats podcast, as Bob mentioned before, and that's a great way to get to know me and understand some of the ways that I talk about emotional eating. But I also now have the Emotional Eats community. So women
Hmm.
can come in and talk to each other. They can get some time with me. But when we are doing things together and we realize we're not alone, that also strengthens how we feel and belonging. You and I have talked about this in relationships, that safety and that belonging, that feels so good. And that's another reason sometimes why we eat is we don't have connection with a lot of people. And
Hmm.
this is a perfect way to have people in your corner that you already know are going to support you.
Because that sounds like if I don't have people, it's just easier to have a relationship with food and then put too much pressure on the food to be something it was never intended to be.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
It is hard to look at food. Every person cannot, I'm going to try to verbalize this. Every person has a different way that they connect with food. And part of being in an emotional eating response is being disconnected from our bodies, from
Mm.
people. And everyone has a different relationship, thought, and what they feel is right with food, and that's okay. It's you finding your special relationship and connection with food that is going to make you feel whole and happy.
That's well said. Well, thanks for joining us again. I will look forward to having you back. And if you've enjoyed this, be sure and leave us a comment. And be sure and check Kim out. She's been doing this for a number of years. She loves doing it. She's got great reviews. And thanks for joining us here with me, Bob Brown, Relationship Headquarters.